Hey, editing KC here, just cutting in at the very beginning of the video to apologize sincerely for the audio quality in this video. My recording software required an update to be able to run this morning, and normally I never have to change any settings when I update the software, and even though all the filters and settings and stuff on my mic are the same right now as they were before the software update, the audio quality and the volume, everything is just way different. So I sound different, and there's going to be portions of the video where things like kind of cut in and out a little bit. You can still make out what I'm saying, but it's not like normal. I'm very sorry about this. I have no idea why this happened. Audio issues are the absolute worst, and you never know they happen until after it's too late. I don't have time to re-record this video. It's already took me way too long to do, so I'm just sorry about the audio. I hope you'll bear with me. Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries, episode 49. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is the third episode on Winter's Heart, where we covered the third quarter of the book, basically, but with a slight change of plans as opposed to what I was originally anticipating last week. It's a small change of plans, it's nothing major. Last week I had thought we would be getting through chapters 15 through 24 this week, but as it turned out, once I was getting up to the chapter 23-24 range, or actually it was probably a little bit earlier than that, probably around 21 or 22, when I realized that no, actually based off of some things, chapter 25 is going to need to be included in this week's reading, and that was the right call to make. Got myself right up to the 75% mark of the book. And thankfully, for spoiler-free impressions, there's a lot more to talk about this week. That makes my life harder in making this video, but it is also kind of nice because the last couple weeks definitely had severe amounts of material that was a struggle to get through, or that didn't really feel like anything happened except for like we're trying to talk about it to some degree or another. This week is a little bit better in that way. There's still a couple chapters where I don't really have that much to say personally, either because, you know, there wasn't a whole lot that happened on the page where like the nitty-gritty details of it matters, where the bigger picture suffices as far as I can tell, and some other chapters where there was just some things that flew over my head that I'm not really intending to get into, not least because I don't think it matters as much, but we'll get into that all in due time. I read for nigh on 7 hours this past week, bringing my total for the book to over 20 hours so far, with 25% left to go. It's looking like this last 25% is going to go pretty good, if the recent 25% is anything to go by, but definitely been a little bit confused this week. I think something that we discussed a little bit last week, kind of, you know, implicit to the conversation that I had in the video, was there's a lot of the information that was given to us in, let's say, the second quarter of the book, and basically all of the useful information in the back half of the book, really almost all of it, was stuff that was happening all at the same time and involved a lot of names and other similar detailed information that was just really difficult to keep track of, that wrap my head around a bunch of names and stuff that I was like misplacing or having a hard time remember. And that held true this week, as much as some of the actual events of the chapters 15 through 25 were good and enjoyable. I enjoyed my reading this week. A lot of it was also like basically flying over my head. I once again had to do a good bit of searching after all of my reading to make sure that I actually had a grasp on who some of the characters were and where in certain past books we had seen them, so that I actually remembered properly who they were, as opposed to a lot of those names just flying right over my head. And a significant chunk of that, now I suppose we can be getting into the spoilers for the book as I kind of get into everything that happened. Fortunately, there was only like a couple of, I guess, storylines, things that really happened, sequences of things that really happened. You have the first several chapters, which were actually finally bringing Matt back into the story and bringing Matt and his POV back in the story, a lot of the Abu Dar plotline back into the story, since he did not exist in the first half of this book and did not exist in book 8 as well. That means that plenty of that stuff that was kind of going on down in Abu Dar since the end of A Crown of Swords is just, it's been long enough since I've read that's a lot of those details are a little bit fuzzier. And then there's also the fact that there's a lot of Sean Chan stuff going on in the book now at this point, where, book 8 had a little bit of their invasion happen, and you got to see a little bit of that, got to have a couple battle sequences with them. It didn't feel like a lot of that was actually relating to how the Sean Chan had existed in the series prior. This time around, in this book, a lot of what's happening with the Sean Chan is relating to certain characters, certain things that have happened in past books, notably like the Great Hunt, for example, when the invasion at Falma occurred, and then there was some of the stuff with Tanchico that has been referenced, where like the actual details of some of that stuff is like a little bit closer to forgotten at this point. Books that the Great Hunt I read at this point like 2 years ago. I think it was June 2023 that I read that. And then like Fires of Heaven, I believe, was the one where Tanchico stuff happened. That might have been the Shadow Rising, actually. I think that was the Shadow Rising. So still books that were like, a year and a half to 2 years ago, somewhere in that range. So it's just been, a while. So a lot of those details are fuzzy. A lot of that stuff is fuzzy. So even though like I've been able to go back and search after my reading that I've been doing the last couple days and look up characters and make sure that I actually remembered who they were from the Wheel of Time Compendium app, and got a little bit, a hint at some of those relations with other characters and where we had seen them, like searching up how we knew some of them from previous books to remember which previous books they were in, that kind of thing. There were a couple characters, for example, that we'll talk about a little bit later who were, I guess, involved in something at the beginning or something like that. I think it was the beginning of A Crown of Swords that I'm pretty sure we haven't seen on the page, let alone mentioned, or rather, that I don't think we've seen mentioned, let alone on the actual page since then. So again, a case of like, it's been a couple books. I can't be expected to remember all of these characters just off the top of my head. So it's been a little bit of a struggle in that regard. But overall, everything's been enjoyable enough. But with that all being said, there's definitely a lot to get into this week. I've already been recording here for up to 10 minutes. And yeah, it's going to be a long episode, I'm sure, just because there's 11 chapters to get through. So let me try to plow through as much as possible. So first, we'll get into Matt's plotline, where, like I said, we haven't seen Matt since A Crown of Swords. So it was nice to get a little bit of Matt back in here, but there was plenty of stuff happening in Abu Dar that I would like to comment about. This will encompass chapters 15 all the way up through, I believe, chapter 19. Yes, chapters 15 through 19 will be Matt's plotline, but there's a couple chapters after that, chapters 20 and 21. Sorry, getting tongue-tied all the time all of a sudden. That are also Abu Dar related and directly related to that plotline in the way that, like, I'm sure here in the last quarter of the book, we're going to see those things converge. But yeah, so we have chapters 15 through 21, which will encompass the Abu Dar stuff for the week, and then 22 through 25 will be Farmatting stuff, things that are associated with Rand's plotline. So we'll get there in due time. As for Matt's plotline, it was nice to get him a little bit back in the story, although I didn't love, bringing him back here in this case, and it's already been, what is it, like a month and a half or somewhere in that range of time since the Sean Chan invaded Abu Dar. Him not really existing in book 8, and this pretty, honestly, significant time jump before we see his plotline again is something that I'm not as enthused about, and even less enthused. I'm just not in love with the Terrace and Palace stuff as far as Matt is concerned, all Queen Tylan and all of that whatnot. Where the Sean Chan are involved in some of this to a degree is kind of neat, I guess, but mostly I just don't love this material. So even though I'm getting to see Matt again, and there are some things that I'm enjoying about this plot line, especially closer to the end of it, there's what I'm hoping to see a continuance of the actual plot progression here that I'm looking forward to seeing, just to get us out of Abu Dar, because the Terrace and Palace stuff I'm just not super into, unfortunately. So I guess we'll just kind of get into it now, finally. Matt, at the beginning of chapter 15, is still trying to do Matt stuff. You know, he's trying to get information and secrets from various different people about various different things so he can use them for his own purposes. At the beginning of this chapter specifically, he's trying to get some secrets about how fireworks work from a gal named Aludra, who is part of, I guess, a traveling show from Balin Luca. And Matt has also been trying to make an agreement with Valen Luca to be able to leave Abu Dar with his company, to be able to sneak out of the city with them, even though they don't plan to move out until spring. So Matt's just kind of in a, stuck in a rock and hard place situation here, where he's got to stay at the palace until spring if he wants to leave with these guys. But he also wants out basically as soon as possible, so he's got to try to find another way out if he wants out sooner. So there's some of that stuff going on. He's healing from a broken leg that he obtained, from a building falling on top of him at the very end of A Crown of Swords. He continues to think about Tylan and how he doesn't really like being in the palace and how he wants to escape Abu Dar. Just kind of this stuff going on in the chapter. Not a whole ton of information. We do get a little hint from Aludra, that gal, the Illuminator that I kind of mentioned just a moment ago. She's looking for a bell founder, and she says that she'll give Matt secrets about fireworks if he can figure out why she needs a bell founder, and a bell founder is somebody who makes or casts spells. I have no idea what's going on with this, but it's kind of whatever. In a later chapter, I can't remember if it's the next chapter or not. I think it's chapter 17 actually. Matt does find a bell founder, but the bell founder kind of refuses to do anything for Matt, let alone Aludra, because this bell founder has been commissioned, I guess, by the Shan Chan to make the biggest bell ever made, so that it can be a celebration of sorts of the Shan Chan sacking Abu Dar. That's all the bell founder stuff that has happened here. No idea what relevance it has to anything, but there's some details of things, I guess. But basically the only other notable thing from chapter 15 that I want to comment on is that whenever Matt thinks of Perrin, and especially Rand, he has flashes of colors in his head, which is kind of like what Rand has whenever he thinks of Matt. Not sure what's going on here either, but that's definitely intriguing. I want to know what's going on there, because I frankly have no theories. I have no ideas what specifically that connection is there that's causing that to happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit of that. But that's basically everything that happens in chapter 15. At the end of it, he gathers up Ulver, and then there's Tom, and then Tylan's son, Beslin. They all kind of gather together there at the end of the chapter to head back towards Abu Dar, back towards the city, because with the traveling show, they're a couple miles away. When they go to head back towards the city, the dice start rolling back in Matt's head, and apparently he's discovered a pattern that whenever the dice roll in his head, it means something bad is going to happen more or less imminently. Whenever the dice stop rolling, something bad happens, which is good to note. In this particular case, normally I wouldn't comment really on that kind of thing. I wouldn't really note that kind of thing in my notes. But it ends up being important here in a second. And for what I think are fairly obvious reasons to the reader, but obviously not to Matt. So a little bit of dramatic irony there. Chapter 16 has the group reaching Abu Dar, seeing that the streets are packed all of a sudden following the sacking of the city. Now, all of a sudden, all of the Shan Chan are just kind of starting to come in here. And remember last week we discovered or discussed a chapter where Tuon, who I'm pretty sure is just the Empress of the Shan Chan, has begun this return to the main continent with her people. And even though she's keeps her face veiled, meaning that she's only a high lady at this point, not quite, the upper rank that she technically is until she unveils herself. It means the Shan-Chan are actually like moving in for all intents and purposes. So the city is packed when this group gets back here in the beginning of the chapter. Tom and Beslin go and take over to some lessons that he has with another woman named Roselle. Just stuff with that character that I frankly don't really care about. I don't care about Over, it's whatever. But the rest of the chapter is made up of Matt kind of searching around in various inns and shops and stuff in the city to try to get some games of dice going, because what we kind of learned in chapter 15, I guess we could mention, is that in order for Matt and anybody else to travel with Luca out of Ebudar, away from Ebudar, it would cost a pretty penny, essentially, but Matt doesn't have that kind of money readily accessible or immediately accessible to him like he does in the Terracin Palace with Tylin, but he wouldn't be able to just take all of that money away without there being some very big questions about it. So he's trying to get like his own stash of money going so that he can afford leaving, I guess. I guess that's kind of what's going on. So Matt's kind of going around the city trying to do some of this, trying to get games of dice going, but with how packed everything is, he doesn't get anything going, so eventually it gets to be pretty late, and he decides to take some back alleys to try to get to the Terracin Palace pretty quickly, as to not upset Tylin, I guess, is probably the motivation there. But along the way, Matt is jumped by the Golem, who we haven't seen since, I'm pretty sure, the end of A Crown of Swords. Maybe the Golem was kind of there, mentioned at least in the beginning of Path of Daggers when the Bowl of the Winds was actually used. But either way, first time that Matt has encountered the Golem since the end of A Crown of Swords, when he used his medallion to harm it. Matt is jumped by the Golem in the back alleys and saved by another man by the name of Noel, I guess is probably how I'm going to pronounce that. Noel comments that he hasn't seen anything like the Golem in his life because I guess for some reason the Golem decides that it's not worth killing Matt in this moment. I forget the exact reason why, but there's something for that, and then the Golem just leaves and disappears into a shadowy crack in a wall, and that's when Nolcom is just like, well, I've never seen anything like that before, and Matt says that he has seen something like that before. And then it's determined that Noel doesn't really have a place to stay anymore because his place of temporary residence in Ebudar has been given over to Shan-Chan people instead, so Matt decides to bring him over to the Terracin Palace to stay with some of his guards, his Red Arms, I believe they're called, because it's mentioned here in the chapter that several Red Arms have died over the last couple years for whatever reasons, or a couple months, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Some of the Red Arms are dead, so he has a room, so he decides to bring Noel along with him. Chapter 17 has them returning to the palace, and they kind of enter through the stables. Since the Shan-Chan arrival has become home just as much to High Lady Suroth as it has to Queen Tylin herself, so there is Shan-Chan presence in the Terracin Palace, which is, I guess, important to note because it means that some of the, I guess, custom and some of the political custom of the palace and of the city, of course, are definitely been shifted a little bit towards whatever the Shan-Chan favor. So they've allowed Tylin to keep her place, essentially, because I guess they're going to try to make her some form of lady so that she can technically rule Ebudar or Altara more officially, or with a little bit more land to some degree. So Tylin kind of has to go along with things a little bit. She kind of wants to a degree, but she kind of has to, because what can she do against the Shan-Chan, especially after they conquer the city? So there's some of that stuff going on, but Matt and Noel do get back to the palace. They go to the stables. Noel stays with some of the Red Arms, as we kind of discussed. He's the one that tells the Red Arms about the encounter with the Golem. And yeah, that's how that goes. Matt tries to convince his men to leave. He tries to tell them that they are allowed to leave Ebudar, that he will give them pay and let them leave so that they could go back and return to Talmanes, find him, while he's still cooped up in Ebudar, because while Tylin's got a hold on him, he can't really do anything. So he's trying to get some of his people to leave. They pretty steadfastly refuse to leave. However, Matt, in a huff, enters the actual palace so that he can find a place to clean up, wash up, because after the encounter with the Golem, he's pretty scuffed. And being pretty scuffed up is something that Tylin does not like. And this is something that a lot of people comment on. While in the palace, Matt encounters Sandar, and Sandar basically says the same thing, although of note, I guess, to some degrees, that Sandar has been, kind of on a floor of the palace where he's not allowed to be anymore. Like something that the Shan would kind of, beat the crap out of him for being if he were caught around up on this floor. While Matt comparatively is allowed up here, Matt's just like, you're not supposed to be up here. You need to get out of here. And then he makes the same offer to Sandar. He says, you should just leave, like, get out of Abu Dar. Like, I give you permission. You don't have to watch over me, type of thing. And Sandar also refuses to leave. So I don't know what the motivations for Sandar are there, but it's something that happens, I guess. It's kind of how a lot of what these last couple books have been. It's just like, I don't know exactly what's going on with all this stuff, but that's what happens, kind of thing. Definitely continuing to be the case here. All along the way, like I said, Sandar and then also some of the Red Arms, various other people have been making comments about Matt's appearance, that he should get cleaned up, that he should get washed up before he goes and actually gets seen in any way, shape, or form by Tylan, lest she be very upset with him. And Matt kind of gets in a huff about this as well. He finally decides he's heard it from enough people. He hears it from Sandar, and he he continues to be pretty salty about it. So he decides that instead of actually making Tylan happy and cleaning up, he's going to just straight up go to Tylan's chambers directly and tell her to shove it, basically, is kind of the interpretation that I got. However, when Matt enters those quarters, he encounters Tylan with a few of the Shan, and some of the Shan here are some that he knows, like High Lady Suroth, who's kind of commandeered the palace, but there's also Tuon here, plus a few others. Apparently, even Suroth seems to have some kind of deference to Tuon, which suggests the role that Tuon actually plays, even though she is, at this point, while veiled, technically only a High Lady. But even so, Tuon takes an immediate kind of liking and attraction to Matt, and can obviously see where this is going to be going at some point in time. She even offers to buy Matt from Tylan before Tylan says that, like, he's not a slave of mine. I can't just sell him to you. Which, I guess, a humorous moment, but that's kind of what goes on there. Matt, in this moment, also tries to trick Tylan into kind of letting him leave Abu Dar by informing her that the Golem is still around and trying to kill him, and the Golem could kill other people like Tylan if, they end up in the way of Matt. But she doesn't want to hear any part of it because reasons. Like I said, I don't love the Terrace and Palace stuff, especially as far as Matt and Tylan are concerned. I'm just kind of over it. I didn't hate it in A Crown of Swords. Like, there were some people who really, really disliked that and thought that it was kind of tasteless and not done very well. I didn't have a huge issue with how it was covered, but in this book, it's definitely grating on me. I was not happy for Matt to come back on the page just for it to be that same kind of stupid stuff again. I'm just not really enthused about it. I don't like it very much. It's not very enjoyable to read. It just has gotten pretty old. So the fact that in next week's reading, it's looking pretty much like Matt's going to be leaving Abu Dar, I really hope we leave Tylan in the past and never see her again. That would be great. Please. Anyway, that's more or less where chapter 18 ends. Chapter 17 ends. Chapter 18 is where we just kind of get some more general information. There's not a whole lot of like direct happenings that happen here. That scene that I mentioned about Matt finding a bell founder and making the biggest bell for the Shan celebration, whatever, that scene occurs in chapter 18. There's also, just general stuff, like I said, with Abu Dar continuing to swell with incoming Shan. Matt kind of comments in his head about how it seems to never end. Matt hears rumor around the city about Rand, kind of the same rumors that we talked about. Was it last week or the week before? The same kind of rumors that like Elaine and people have been hearing about Rand in accordance to the White Tower, about how the White Tower has acknowledged him as the Dragon Reborn and offered him amnesty. And so Matt finally hears some of these rumors as well in Abu Dar. So I guess that's something. Matt continues to yearn for a way out of the city, but this is a moment where he decides that he can, instead of trying to lug an entire chest of gold out of the palace and being very conspicuous about it, that he's going to try to inconspicuously slowly take a few pieces of gold now and again to slowly bring some cash, stash some of it elsewhere in the city so that he can use some of that to, leave in the spring if he needs to. Otherwise, if nothing else, so that he can have a stash of cash somewhere that he can use immediately on hand instead of whatever's in the palace. And in doing so, in chapter 18, he comes to an agreement with Mistress Anan back at the Wandering Woman, that inn, to keep the gold and stuff in her cellar. And then he has some of his Red Arms transport some of his old clothes and gold and stuff to the Wandering Woman. That's where that plot kind of happens, is in this chapter. At the very end of the chapter, Matt walks into his own rooms in the palace to find Tuon examining his spear. She also offers to buy the spear from Matt the way that she had offered to buy Matt from Thailand, like, name your price and I'll spend like 10 times as much on it. But of course, Matt got the spear from his experience in Rodian. At least I'm pretty sure that's where he got it, because he, scratches at his neck, at the handkerchief around his neck. And tells Tylan it's like no person would pay this price once, let alone 10 times over. Only a fool would do that, as kind of a way to suggest that, like, he's not going to sell the spear. And then she finds that kind of amusing. It seems like she finds that amusing, and then she leaves. So just kind of little moments, several little moments like this have happened over the course of Matt's POV here, and a couple more of these happen, the rest between him and Tuon. Curious to see where that goes in the rest of this book specifically, because I was thinking something a little bit more direct would happen, but maybe it happens later in the series. I just know that something's going to happen between those two because of Matt's prophecy with the Daughter of the Nine Moons, and the fact that Tuon will take up the mantle, the role of the Daughter of the Nine Moons when she unveils herself. So maybe it doesn't happen until after she actually makes that move. I don't know for sure. That's just a random guess on my part. However, chapter 19 sees Matt deciding to return to the Wandering Woman to check up on his gold, because at this point, chapter 18, like I said, with some of that general information, part of that general information, the state of it, is the fact that it took place over, a while. I don't know exactly how long, but it was like a indefinite amount of time, basically a little while, a few weeks, maybe a few weeks sounds about right, but you kind of get what I'm going for. So now chapter 19, after that encounter with Tuon at the very end of 18, is when Matt decides, I'm going to go check up on my gold. So he does that. Beginning in chapter 19, he does that. When he gets to the Wandering Woman, it turns out that Mistress Anan is out of the inn at the moment, but he does go back to the kitchen to kind of tell the cook how he misses her food, which apparently is the truth. He doesn't really like the cooking in the Terracin Palace, I guess. Or maybe it just reminds him too much of his captivity. But the cook gives him some free food, in exchange for the compliment. And after Matt is done eating there is when Mistress Anan returns to the inn. The reason why she was out of the inn in this moment was because she had located and was transferring an Aes Sedai named Jolene to the inn to kind of try to help keep her safe, and then eventually try to transport her out of Ebu Dar, keep her as an Aes Sedai out of the clutches of the Shanshan, because there were several Aes Sedai in the city, and all the rest of them were, taken up by the Shanshan, notably of which Teslin, who was kind of in league with Jolene. I believe when I commented about some things that happened at the beginning of A Crown of Swords, I'm pretty sure there was a scene somewhere in the early portions of A Crown of Swords between Teslin and Jolene, kind of discussing about, like, the girls in Ebu Dar back when that was a thing, and how that had to do with Elida, the White Tower. I don't think they had anything to do with Moghedien. So like I said, it's just kind of vague things, just characters that I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm sitting here like, do I know who these characters are? Clearly I should, because the book is talking about them like I should. And I didn't, so I had to look them up after reading this chapter. But Jolene was brought to the inn by Anan so that she could obviously help her escape, get away from the Shanshan, because being imprisoned by Shanshan as an Aes Sedai would not be fun, as some of the other Aes Sedai would be wont to tell you. While the whole group is kind of gathered here in the kitchen, Jolene is nearly caught by a Shanshan named, I forget how her name is pronounced. Is it Egeanan? Egeanan? Something like that? No idea. I'm going to say Egeanan because it's funny. Egeanan kind of barges over to the kitchen to talk with Anan, demanding her best rooms because she's been made kind of part of the blood, a Shan-Chan type of ranking system, and needs to have a room in the Wandering Woman. Anan agrees again and leaves. Matt conceals the face of Jolene in the scene so that as an Aes Sedai, she's not seen directly by the Shan-Chan, because that wouldn't be great. As we learn, there's maybe not as much to fear with Egeanin, but that's stuff that happens a little bit later in the chapter. Some interesting, enjoyable stuff that I'm actually kind of looking forward to seeing the future of. But in this scene, that is how that goes. The Shan-Chan leaves and has a captain directly with her that Matt recognizes. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later. And Anan has Matt bring Jolene to stay in the cellar of the Wandering Woman, just to kind of keep her safe until, a way for her to leave becomes apparent. Matt mentions to Jolene a letter left in his jacket about Elaine and Nynaeve. This was a scene that I basically entirely forgotten about in, pretty sure it was The Crown of Swords, where either Teslin or Jolene had left a letter for Matt in his jacket to kind of warn Elaine and Nynaeve to kind of leave so that they couldn't easily, gather them up and then take them back to Elaida, so there'd be an excuse for them not to go back to the White Tower, not to go back to Elaida. At least that's my best recollection / understanding of that, but that was kind of the letter that Matt had gotten. Matt mentions this letter to Jolene, assuming that it was Jolene that had left it. Jolene's response basically suggests that she was not the one that made that note, but is happy to, consider all debts repaid, quote unquote, if Matt helps her to leave the city somehow. And Matt's just like, okay, I will help you leave the city somehow. But then after this, Matt goes back to the Terrasen Palace and actually goes up to some floors where even he's not supposed to be, to find some of the, what are they called? Why can't I remember? The Damane, that's what they're called. Of course, the Aes Sedai that were captured by the Shan-Chan have been made Damane at this point, and one of those is Teslin. Matt finds Teslin in the palace, and Teslin speaks to him, very obviously being the one who did write the letter, and says that the reason she left that note was because she wanted to elude Elaida more than for any benefit directly for Elaine and Nynaeve, because she wants to see Elaida deposed, sorry. So it's not entirely sure what Teslin's motivations are. At this point, not entirely sure what Jolene's are. Maybe the two of them will come around to kind of, I guess, our quote-unquote good guy side at this point, since they don't really like Elaida directly. That'll be something that'll be interesting to see, but Matt agrees to help Teslin escape the palace for some reason, and then as a condition for helping Teslin escape, he also has to help another Aes Sedai named Edazina escape as well, and I have absolutely zero idea if Edazina is someone who I'm supposed to know. I understand I'm supposed to know Jolene and Teslin, and I sort of remember them a little bit. I don't remember Edazina at all. But then we get into the next couple chapters. Chapters 20 and 21 are no longer Matt POV, but they are still Ebu Dar stuff. And were honestly really enjoyable to read this morning. I had a really fun time with these couple chapters because we get to see some Shan-Chan POVs in a context that makes a little bit more immediate sense. Previous Shan-Chan POVs in previous books have kind of not been my favorite up to this point, because they have up to this point seemed disconnected enough from the main characters or the main story, and had enough other jargon and technical whatnot going on that's made them a little bit hard to follow. Pretty notable of which, I'm pretty sure, and was something that I just remembered recently, when I read The Great Hunt a couple of years ago, I feel like I vaguely remember there being like 2 chapters in that book that I straight up did not like, and those being the only things that I didn't like about that book. And if I'm not mistaken, I think those 2 chapters were both Shan-Chan POVs, so I just didn't really care about the Shan-Chan stuff. And up to this point in the series, I think the Shan-Chan stuff has, generally speaking, been kind of lower on my list of what I've enjoyed about the Wheel of Time. So that's kind of been a funny consistency that I've noticed as like a hindsight moment. But even more recently, there have been Shan-Chan things that I haven't enjoyed as much. Last week, we talked about a chapter that was from Tuon's POV, in which like 98% of that crap flew right over my head. I had no idea what was going on. and I didn't even have a firm grasp on who Tuon was or where she kind of ranked amongst the Shan-Chan, because things were just so unclear to me as a reader that I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. All I understood is that Tuon was the daughter of the Nine Moons, and that was like basically it. So I haven't had the greatest experience with Shan-Chan POVs, but chapters 20 and 21 were really, really good. I guess before I get into these couple of chapters, I should also note that many of the characters involved in chapters in 20 and 21, some of the more technical, I guess, quasi-political stuff happening, were characters that we have seen previously. Again, this is what I was mentioning earlier in the video. Like, most of these characters, most of the names that are kind of mentioned in these couple chapters are characters who we've seen previously in the series. Some of them, the Great Hunt specifically, but it's been long enough since the Great Hunt and other direct Shan-Chan stuff that I just don't remember the names. This was another aspect of me this morning, just like a lot of things flying over my head that I wish didn't fly over my head, because it's stuff that hasn't been lodged in my brain for several books because it hasn't needed to be. But either way, we get to follow a gal named Bethamin, who checks up on some of the Damane in the Terrasen Palace, including Teslin. Bethamin kind of has a sort of punishment given to Teslin, because when she checks in on the woman, it seems like she's in much better spirits, and namely also a lot more well-behaved than normal, and that has Bethamin kind of suspicious as to the state of Teslin, why in the world she would be feeling this way, and it's probably has to do with plotting an escape, which of course we know she just talked to Matt when she had Matt agree to free her to some degree. So Bethamin kind of has retaliation against Teslin, even though Teslin obviously in this scene did nothing wrong. In fact, she did everything to right compared to what she normally does. Gotta love when that happens. But Bethamin goes to her inn in Ebu Dar for the rest of the chapter to do something. I think it was like to collect money for something, but I don't precisely remember what it was she was going to do that for. She was like, has basically the rest of the day off other than checking on the Damane early in the morning. That was like the only task that she had to do for the day, I guess, was kind of what was going on. Along the way, we get some of her internal thoughts, some of her fears and concerns about, I guess, her own existence as a Shan-Chan. She recalls a scene from back at Falma in The Great Hunt, where she had been horrified by seeing a couple of Soldam being held by the Adam bracelets, which, of course, is not a great thing for her, and it reminds her of something that happened in Tanchico, which was even worse, which we get a little bit more detail of, I believe, in the next chapter. But one of the fears that Bethamin goes over in this chapter in her head is knowing that if she, as basically all of the Shan-Chan at this point, have kind of been tested regularly up to a certain age to make sure that they couldn't actually channel, all of the Soldam have been tested in this way. And since some of the Soldam were found to be, kind of restricted by the Adam bracelets, like the couple that Bethamin found were, it's a thing that some of the Soldam have been being tested again, even after they were proven not to be able to channel, and they're being tested again to make sure of that more, because it kind of seems to be the case that people who use the Adam, who have control over Damane long enough, come to be able to learn to channel themselves. And maybe it's a condition where in order to be Soldam, in order to be able to control somebody with an Adam bracelet, you have to have the ability to channel in the first place. I don't know if that's exactly how that is. It might be a misinterpretation, a misreading of that, but it seems like that might be a suggestion that's going on. Even if it's not, Bethamin doesn't want to be made into a Damane. But again, we'll kind of get into the sphere a little bit more, so she's just kind of trying to plot some things to make sure that she is able to retain her freedom. She does not want to be tested again, for example. Once she gets to her room in Ebu Dar, she encounters a seeker of the truth there, and the seeker seems to be rummaging through some of her stuff. But regardless of what he's rummaging through, the seeker tells Bethamin to spy on Egeanin for him and report everything back to him, because he's kind of trying to track some treasonous affairs that have happened, I guess, kind of across the Shan-Chan invasions of the main continent. So at Falma, at Tanchico, at Ebu Dar, he's trying to track some treasonous affairs that have occurred in this time since the return has begun. and is trying to catch who it has been that's been doing some of these things. And he has a strong reading, apparently, that Egianin has been doing some stuff. So he's tasking Bethamin to actually reacquaintance herself with Egianin and report back to him everything that happens. Bethamin at first was fearful that the Seeker knew about her being able to be controlled by an Adam bracelet, that was going to be the end for her. But for the moment, she's just been tracked with, spying on Egianin. Chapter 21 sees Egianin and Baal Damon in the room in the Wandering Woman, their room over there, because they're lovers, and she also owns him as kind of the Dakovel, is that the word? I forget off the top of my head, but Egianin kind of owns Baal Damon, who is a character from early in the series that I had totally forgotten about. But Baal Damon is the one that Matt had recognized in the inn from a few chapters back, and it turns out that Baal Damon had also recognized Matt, which is an important point because in this chapter, Baal Damon they talk about possibilities for like traditional marriage and whether Egianin may be caught by the Seeker of the Truth, because apparently there's one that has been tracking her for some stuff for a little while now, even though she's been trying to lay back while she's in Abu Dar to not really do anything that would cause her to get caught. But in the middle of their conversations in the inn here, Bethamin does enters the room and also tells Egianin directly that a Seeker has told her to spy on Egianin for him, which, telling Egianin this would itself be a sort of treasonous act. That's not something that Bethamin should have done. But it turns out that the thing that happened to Bethamin in Tanchico, which was even worse than the things she was thinking about from back in... what's the place? Falma. Sorry, there's too many names rumbling around in my head. Bethamin had found a couple Soldam in Falma being controlled by Adam bracelets, but in Tanchico, Bethamin had actually been in an Adam herself, that she was actually made Damani herself. But in Tanchico, Egianin had actually freed her from the Adam and said nothing about it. So in that way, Bethamin kind of feels like she has a debt to Egianin, and that's why she tells the woman that, hey, yeah, the Seeker just told me to spy on you. What are we going to do about this? And it's to such a degree where the Seeker kind of suspects enough stuff that suddenly now Baal Damon and Egianin kind of know they have to leave, because the Seeker is going to get her, basically. And Bethamin's not going to be able to do anything to help, like not going to be able to just not report things. Because as a result of kind of having this sort of implicit debt to one another, this also means that Egianin and Bethamin, kind of if they were doing their job, if they were to be questioned by the Seeker, they would have to name the other one. Egianin would have to say that, hey, Bethamin can't be Soldam anymore. She has to be Damane. She can technically channel, type of thing. But Bethamin would also have to say, Egianin freed me from an Adam bracelet and said nothing about it. Like, didn't do any legal process. So there'd be some major issues with all of that. So basically, Egianin tells Bethamin, I guess, to kind of like hang around and do nothing, and she's going to leave, basically, I think is kind of the plan. Bethamin, well, I guess Egianin doesn't really necessarily have the plan to leave herself. She wants Baal to leave. She basically starts writing a note to grant Baal his freedom so that he can take off and leave without her. But he, again, kind of similar to some of Matt's people, refuses to do this. He instead tells her that he'll start gathering a sort of crew of people together to be able to take a ship and leave themselves and just leave Abu Dar entirely, and that he's going to start building a crew with Matt. Because again, he recognized Matt in the inn, just as Matt had sort of recognized him. Baal knew who Matt was. Matt didn't quite fully remember who Baal was. So there's definitely going to be some interaction here very soon that I'm looking forward to. Like, really looking forward to seeing how this plotline continues, because at this point, we're probably going to see Matt spring Teslin and whatever her name is. I already forgot the name, because why do I remember an Aes Sedai name, that character that I don't remember at all? Edazina, that's the other one. Matt, we're probably going to see Matt free Teslin and Edazina from the palace, take them to the Wandering Woman, obviously bring up Jolene as well so that they can all leave. And at the same time, we're going to have some interaction where Bail Damon and therefore Eganon also end up part of this kind of group to leave the city. Hopefully that all happens and actually gets taken care of and finished in this book, because that means we can be out of Terrace Palace. That means we can be out of Abu Dar. That would be fantastic. So that's basically where all of that plot line ends, but that is not where the reading for the week ended. There's still a few more chapters to talk about, and this is all stuff to do with Rand's plotline. Fortunately, there's a couple chapters here with not a whole lot going on, so hopefully we can get through this relatively quickly. But this is all stuff going down in and around Farmatting. There's also a couple questions that I have about some of the details of things going on here that seem to be inconsistent, like I don't know, but interesting stuff going on nonetheless. So chapters 22 through 25 start off with Rand in Farmatting seeking to kill some of his treacherous Ashaman. It seems like he's kind of left hints in some of the places like the Stone of Tyr and some other locations that have suggested that maybe that he was going to be in Farmatting or something like that. So he's able to trick, I guess, several of his former Ashaman, the people who tried to kill him, the people who tried to murder him in Carrion, to come here, but so that he could instead kill them himself. And apparently he is, I guess my sort of understanding of this, that he's chosen Farmatting to be the place to do this, is because this location has a ter'angreal in the middle of the city that makes it so that people cannot channel within it, within the limits of the city. It's a city that is built on an island in the middle of a lake. There's, I believe, like 3 entrances to it. But this ter'angreal system that keeps people from being able to channel, kind of like a steading, is one that keeps women from being able to channel around like the bridge, basically. So from the bridges over to the island and within the city, they can't channel. And then there's a somewhat wider range than that, where male channelers cannot channel. And Rand, I'm assuming, has chosen this location to be this kind of showdown that he tries to have with some of the Ashaman, specifically so that they can't channel against him, and so that his channeling can't fail him. So it requires a little bit more sneaky ways to kill them. Matt is kind of tracking one of his previous Ashaman within the city in this chapter, follows him into an alley where Rand smashes his windpipe, kind of starts that process of killing him. It turns out there's a second Ashaman that's also there, and Rand gets that second Ashaman and kind of maneuvering pretty sneakily to have that second Ashaman accidentally deal the killing blow to the former one. So we suddenly have one of the Ashaman that's dead. This happens, and suddenly Rand and this other Ashaman, who I forget his name, the names don't really matter because the one of them's dead already and the other one dies in this chapter anyway. They are kind of having a show off, or not a show off, they're having a showdown here, about to obviously attack each other now in this moment, but they can kind of feel that guards are coming pretty soon. There's some rumbling going on. It's just like, the guards are going to come, and if they catch us, we're going to both be hanged, basically. Let's agree to a truce and not kill each other right now so that we can avoid the guards. They make this sort of implicit agreement. Rand runs away in one direction out of the alley, and then the Ashaman runs the other way out of the alley. They both leave. They both get out in time for guards to not be able to catch them. But shortly after the Ashaman exits the alley, some unknown assailant ends up cutting him, and that cut being severe enough to kill him. I'm not sure who this assailant is. I'm guessing that the fact that the cut was able to kill him so quickly and kind of put him unconscious so quickly is meant to imply that it's somebody. And if that's the case, then I'm wondering if it's maybe that same blade that caused Rand to come very close to death, despite it being a pretty minor injury, all things considered, back in A Crown of Swords. Was that the end of A Crown of Swords when it was Padan Fade? I don't know, probably wrong on that, but I'm assuming that because the name of the assailant was not given, that the Ashaman was not able to turn around and see who it was in time or whatever, that it's somebody who we're supposed to be able to imply who it was, and that's my guess. Probably wrong, but that's my guess. So either way, both of these Ashaman are dead, but there are a few more Ashaman that are around. that are probably going to be in Farmatting very soon if they're not already. And this causes Rand to go back to his inn where he and Min and all the rest of the group are staying. He explains to them basically what happened, just like, hey, a couple Ashaman are dead, but there are some others, and they might very well know where we are, just in case. Pack up all your stuff. We're going to a different inn. And that's what they do. That's how that goes. And they're in a different inn when we see him again here in just a couple chapters. Chapters 23 and 24 are primarily from a different POV, the POV of Shallan, who even just in this book had gone from pretty early in the book forgetting who the heck Shallan was, who was one of the lovers that was caught accidentally by Rand in Carrion back in the end of Path of Daggers. I guess that has to have been when that was. I'd already forgotten who that character was in this book when the character came up, and when Sorelea and Cadsuane were deciding that they were going to kind of blackmail these two lovers and say, hey, we're not going to tell anybody what you guys have been doing. We're not going to cause shame to the Athian Mier, who of course Shallan is Athian Mier. Apparently she's married already, and the reason this affair is such a big deal is because if it were to be revealed that this happened, that would be major problems for sea folk politics. But they've decided that they're going to blackmail these two for their own purposes. At this moment, it seems to be that Cadsuane's purpose is to take... There's just so many freaking names, people. Alana, and actually go after Rand. And Alana is able to lead them all to Rand because of the bond. With the group are several other not Ashaman. There are a few Ashaman, though, but various Aes Sedai and some Ashaman. And it turns out some of the Aes Sedai have taken some of the Ashaman as warders, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they're all kind of just outside of Farmatting, going to the city, and Alana's looking for Rand, basically, is what's going on. Hareen also is looking for Rand. I guess there's something to do with she just wants to be kind of around where he's at. I don't know what the details are. I forget, because I completely have forgotten who Hareen even is. Don't remember at all anything to do with her character prior to these scenes in this book, so forgive me. But Shallan has been told by Cadsuane to spy on Hareen, so that's why Shallan is part of this group. Is, for obvious reasons, like, if you don't want me to tell anybody that you had an affair, you're going to spy on Hareen for me, so you're going to come with us. That's kind of what happened. So Shallan, Hareen, Cadsuane, Alana, some other Aes Sedai, and Ashaman are heading to Farmatting to find Rand. And they enter the city on the north side via a bridge where it turns out, obviously all the characters kind of go through the stilling. It's not a stilling, obviously, but it's entering the steading and not being able to channel anymore. Shallan kind of has panic attacks associated with this, and this causes a bond between her and Hareen that they haven't had in a long time. Apparently they're sisters. I think I remember that being the case. But this is kind of one of the things that's happening. Farmatting is a peace-related state where all the guards are meant to keep the peace, but, obviously nobody can channel in the city, and then they either take or have people peace bond their weapons. But that's what happens in this chapter, is the group ends up in Farmatting. Cool. In chapter 24, it's also really not much that happens. The group kind of is accepted and welcomed by the First Council, the council generally of Farmatting, the group of people that kind of runs the show here, all except for Cadsuane, who is not actively welcomed because apparently she was had caused some problems for some of these people a few decades back, basically. But they all have like an interaction, I guess, here. I don't know or really care what all the details of that interaction were. It's just something that happens. They all end up climbing to the top of a palace somewhere in the chapter, and they look down at a ter'angreal, the ter'angreal that it is that prevents channeling. I guess that's something that they get to observe, be like, hey, this is the way this stuff works. But then there's like what feels like an act of inconsistency. Viren in this chapter, and she's going by a different name in Farmatting because apparently she's from Farmatting, but was like exiled or something. So she's going by a different name so people don't, cause problems with that. Either way, Viren is able to say at some point in the chapter that a man has channeled and they all kind of look at another ter'angreal question mark. Is it a different one that points to where the man channeling was at? But where is it pointing to? And when was the man channeling for this to happen? Is it like this ter'angreal can detect channeling within a certain radius outside of the radius in which, the radius of not being able to channel is? Like, this was made not super clear at all. It's like, nobody can channel in the city, so how in the hell can you know when somebody's channeling and be able to point directly to it if they can't channel in the first place? What's going on here? I was just very confused by this. It didn't make any sense to me. So if somebody could clear that up, explain to me like what the actual mechanic of that is, I have no idea. That's something that happens in the chapter. I was just confused. Anyway, we move on to chapter 25, where we actually come back to Rand's POV. Back in another inn. Like I said, he kind of moved inns with some of the other people. Rand and Min await Alana's arrival, because it has been in this point in time that Rand has been able to feel. It's like, oh yeah, Alana was like far away, and like now she's here. Like she's in Farmatting basically. She's going to be here, and she's going to be here imminently. And Min is pretty anxious about this, of course. Min kind of paces around. She's also pretty anxious, not just about Alana, but also about the fact that Olivia, who has joined the group over here, I guess was one of the people that came with Rand out of Camelin. That's the place that they were in before. Apparently, Olivia is going to somehow help Rand to die, whatever that means. I presume that's going to be something that gets resolved in the last book of the series, probably, question mark. No idea, but that's a viewing that Min has, and she's pretty upset about it. She's also upset about Alana, obviously, and Alana eventually arrives, and she arrives with Cadsuane. The two of them kind of have an implicit standoff, Cadsuane and Rand. I don't remember the details of their actual conversation. I just know it was kind of entertaining to read. I just don't remember like what actually comes of it, if anything. I don't think anything important comes of it. But when Cadsuane does leave, and she leaves with Min, because, Alana actually needs to talk with Rand alone, I guess. Alana asks Rand why it was that she was unconscious for a few days. This was a criticism that I had a couple chapters back when the chapter started, and it turned out everybody was on the road to Farmatting and Alana was with them. I was just like, but wait a minute, we left her, at the end of the last Cadsuane POV with Alana having just gone into like a effective coma, like she's just unconscious and healing won't wake her up or anything. What's going on with that? And now she's awake. Why did you cut all of that out? It was cut out implicitly because she was just unconscious for apparently 3 days, it seems like. And the reason why she was made unconscious, I guess, was because of Rand being bonded by Elaine and Avienda and Min. I don't know why that happens, and if it was a thing that somebody could be made unconscious if their warder was bonded by another person. Seems like this is something that should be knowledge by the White Tower, but maybe it's just been so freaking long since anybody's done something like this that they wouldn't know. I don't know, but it just seemed kind of weird. But even so, Alana asks why it is that she was unconscious for days, and Rand says that, hey, yeah, if I'm going to be bonded to somebody, at least I'll ought to be bonded to somebody who asked me before doing it to kind of spite her. But he refuses to tell her who it was, obviously, for obvious reasons. But in this chapter, we do get Rand kind of starting to learn some information that we've already known from some of the other chapters, of course. Like, he tells Rand that all of the sisters that were stilled previously back in Carrion that were being washed over by the Aiel have been healed now by one of the Ashaman. She explains that a few of the Ashaman have been bonded to some of the Aes Sedai that are actually here now, and the reason why they've done that, why they did that bonding, I guess was sort of like a political move of sorts. They were probably a bit fearful. Alana assumes that the Ashaman would have been not really wanting to return to the Black Tower lest they be accused of being part of the plot to kill Rand. So they've been bonded by Aes Sedai who have a sworn fealty to Rand. So I guess it's kind of a way to avoid some of that. And again, to avoid returning to the Black Tower in the first place, I guess is my understanding of that. Alana also tells Rand how all of the rest of the sisters around have sworn fealty to him. That's something that he has to consider and talk about. And she also tells him that like he needs to like actually use the Aes Sedai for his purposes, where Rand kind of thinks in his head in this moment, he's like, those first 5 or however many Aes Sedai that I had swear fealty to me was more a show of power to prove that I could make Aes Sedai do what I wanted, that I'm not in the clutches of the Aes Sedai. And now it's like, maybe I should actually use them for my purposes, since I have a lot of Aes Sedai at this point that have sworn fealty, and presumably more that are going to at some point. So that's something interesting. We then have a scene switch that at the very end of the chapter, we see Viren have a little POV in which she's kind of around. She walks in on Cadsuane having a kind of heated discussion with some of the other Aes Sedai about Rand and Alana and kind of the technicalities of what some things are going on. Some of the other Aes Sedai are upset that Alana is not actively with Cadsuane right now, because it means that they cannot actively find a way to Rand, because Alana was their direction towards Rand. And Cadsuane kind of tells them it's like, it's fine, she'll be back, like, it's whatever, you'll be okay. Viren is apparently, while making tea, is commanded to make some tea for Cadsuane. She was going to put some pretty heavy, I guess probably sleeping potion or something like that, because she's been up to this point pretty uncertain, maybe even suspicious of what Cadsuane's purposes with Rand were. But after hearing a little bit of an explanation in this chapter that Cadsuane is kind of like legitimately worried about Rand, about, you know, his humanity, about him turning into a stone emotionally, basically, where he needs to learn how to feel things, relearn how to feel things, that's what she's trying to do with him. I guess Viren kind of decides that this is acceptable motivations as far as wanting to be associated with Rand are concerned, and so doesn't use the potion against her. And that's basically all of the reading. So yeah, actually that's a lie. There is a couple scenes, actually, come to think, from chapter 22 during this moment that I didn't talk about earlier that I think are sort of worth mentioning. One of those things is just a very minor point, and it's when Rand had returned to his inn in Farmatting and told the rest of the group kind of the things that happened and told them to pack up so that they could move to a different inn. An important scene happens here where Rand kind of discovers that he can actually draw really well and kind of draws images of some of the other Ashaman, or at least that's what I understood happened, which he comments to himself is not a skill that he had, that is definitely a Lews Therin skill, that he should be kind of spooked by the fact that he can suddenly draw very well, where Rand could not do that prior. I'm thinking that this scene might suggest that we're finally starting to see a merging of Rand and Lews Therin. I would like to see that happen at some point pretty soon. I think I had commented a couple books back, it might have even been like in book 6 or 7 at this point, where I was getting a little bit wary about the Rand v. Lews Therin thing, because the dynamic that they had in Rand's hand, or Rand's head, there we go, was getting a little bit tiresome and repetitive at certain points. And it kind of still feels that way. It's not quite as frequent anymore, but a lot of that is because Rand's POV isn't as frequent anymore. He has had less than the most amount of POV pages in the last couple of books, as far as I can tell. But it is still something that's, you know, a little bit irksome, that's taking a little while to resolve. I would like to see resolution there, and I'm hoping that this suggests that that's going to happen at some point soon-ish. There's also another scene in chapter 22 where we have a man who is apparently both named Luke and Isam, I guess like a couple different personalities at once, and he can kind of freely switch between the two. That he also has a skill to be able to step directly into Tel'aran'rhiod somehow and step directly out of it. The scene sees him step out of Tel'aran'rhiod into a room to kill a couple of people that are in the bed, and I guess he kind of expects those people who he kills to be like Rand, I guess. Maybe Rand and Min or something, but it turns out that they're not Rand and Min, and he's kind of disappointed by this, so he returns to Tel'aran'rhiod and discusses with the person who wants him, presumably to kill Rand, if that's the case, who tells him to just kind of lie low for a little bit, and he agrees to do that, and presumably this employer is one of the Forsaken. No idea whatsoever what's going on there, and I have no idea at all either if Luke or Isam are names that I'm supposed to recognize. If they are, I don't remember them at all. So yeah, that's actually all the reading that happened. And despite my best efforts, we had yet another hour-long episode of Wheel of Time Diary. But all things considered, the fact that this is not one of the hour and 20-minute episodes, let alone longer than that, is a really good thing. So I'm going to get out of your face now. That's basically all the things that happen in this week's reading. I am, over the next few days, actually going to be finishing up the book instead of, reading this late in the weekend or early next week, just in time to be able to make the diary. I'm going to finish this over the rest of this week, over the next few days at the time of this video's release. Finish the book, record the next diary, have it done, and then have a review for the book up next month. I'm really excited for the last quarter of the book, even though I have struggled with certain portions of this, and even some of the portions that I've enjoyed, I've struggled with just how many names and details of stuff that I just don't remember have been thrown out there. That's made it a little bit hard for me personally to keep track, which I know is a personal problem. I shouldn't hold it against the book directly, but it's also a fact that several of these things are things that I don't remember because they have not been important for several books in some cases. And if Robert Jordan was any more efficient, it would be faster than several books to deal with some of these things. But even so, I am excited for the last quarter of this book. I'm thinking we are probably, well, I don't even know at this point, but I'm hoping that we're still going to get to see Rand clear the taint on Side in this book. I'm thinking we're going to see Matt and some of the other people, a couple of those Sean Chan that I kind of mentioned, and several of the Aes Sedai get to escape Abu Dar, and really hoping so because I'm kind of sick of Abu Dar at this point. I haven't disliked any of the Abu Dar stuff really, except for just not being huge on the Terrace and Palace material in like this book specifically, and even in the last book it was kind of so-so. But I am at this point just kind of tired of Abu Dar. I want to be out of here. We've been here for like 3 books worth of time at this point, and that is altogether too long for one location, considering that like Tanchico was only like 1 book basically. But either way, that will be the end of this diary. I will look forward to reading the rest of the book here very soon, and to seeing you guys again next week for the final Wheel of Time diary for Winter's Heart. And I'm hoping that it ends on just as high of a note as everybody says it does, because that'll do a long way towards considering where this book is going to land in the rankings, because at this point, it's not very high up, we'll say. So yeah, like I said, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys next week for the finale episode of Winter's Heart.